excited to have such an awesome group in the audience today. We are thrilled to be co-hosting this event with YWCA and Represent Women to bring you our webinar, Lifting as We Climb, How We Can Grow a Diverse Movement to Address Racism. In the chat, you'll find links to each of these organizations' websites where you can learn more about their incredible work. Before we begin with our event here, we would be remiss if we didn't start our discussion today by acknowledging the devastating escalation of conflict that is happening in the Middle East and its disproportionate impact on women and girls. Our hearts remain with those who have been impacted directly or indirectly by this violence. And we're committed to helping women connect the dots between the issues that they care about and the role that they can play in creating change in their communities. So hopefully today, with these wonderful minds joining us, we can have that really rich dialogue of what this looks like in action. Thank you, and let's get started. I want to mention that you'll see in the chat here a link to further join She Should Run and our network of members in our community. As a reminder here, the session is being recorded and will be available on our website in the next week. Closed captioning is also available in the CC box at the bottom of your screen, and we have two ASL interpreters here today. Thank you all for helping make this event accessible. We really welcome you to use the chat to participate in the conversation throughout this webinar. Please make sure that you have it set to everyone so we can all see your messages and engage together. We also have a Q&A box available at the bottom of your screen where you're able to throw any questions you may have during the conversation. We have time allotted at the end of the panel to answer questions from our audience. And last, but certainly not least, we will have a post-webinar survey for you to receive your feedback on how this event has gone. We're really eager to hear from you and incorporate your thoughts and feelings on our offerings and want to make sure that we continue to provide the most effective programming for you all. My colleague Megan has dropped that link in the chat for you to take at the end. Our agenda here today starts out with our moderator, Gabe Archuleta of YWCA, talking a little bit about She Should Run and our work on the issues. And then we'll get to meet our awesome speakers and spend most of our time there talking with them and having a rich discussion and answering any Q&A that you may have as well in our audience. And then we will wrap this event with some wonderful closing thoughts from our speakers and some next steps to put what we've learned here today into action. So without further ado, I am so honored to get to introduce our moderator for this event, Gabe Archuleta. Gabe is a powerhouse, and we're so lucky to get to have her today. Gabe is the YWCA Utah's Vice President of Race and Gender Equity and Director of Public Policy. With over 20 years of experience in the nonprofit sector, she is dedicated to advocating for justice for marginalized communities. She's provided legal representations to immigrant and refugee survivors of violence and human trafficking, worked in refugee resettlement, and served people with disabilities. Gabe also worked for Utah's judicial branch, leading initiatives to improve outcomes for families and ensuring compliance with the Federal Indian Child Welfare Act. She holds a joint Juris Doctor and Master of Public Policy degree, as well as a Bachelor of Speech Communication and Bachelor of Spanish from the University of Utah. I am so proud to get to hand the reins over now to our indomitable speaker, Gabe.
Oh, thank you so much, Sophia. Welcome, everybody. I am so thrilled to share this space with you today. And what we're going to do to get started is take a pulse check on where you are at with your leadership journey. You'll see a poll pop up now. Okay, great. Thank you for sharing. So it looks like we have folks at all different parts of the consideration phase, and we're just excited to be on this journey with you. We have people who have run for office. We have people who are thinking to run for office. Thank you so much for sharing. So we are going to dive into it now, and let's talk about why we want to address women's leadership and address racism locally today. The answer really is because the research told us we needed to. She Should Run focuses on getting more women to consider a run for office and is always staying on the pulse of what will consider and encourage women to run. Earlier this year, She Should Run released a comprehensive study to understand what motivators exist that would increase the pool of women considering a run for office. And while we know a lot about why women don't run, we knew if we wanted to reach huge numbers of women fully representative of the diversity of this country, we would need to get into the weeds on what would motivate women from all different backgrounds to run for office. Women aren't a monolith, so this research is nuanced and dense, but there's one through line that came through loud and clear. If we want to reach women who aren't already thinking about elected office, we need to lean into conversations they're already having about the issues that matter to them most, that matter to us most. So She Should Run looked at the leading research in the field on what issues matter most to women and landed on 5 key issues: climate change, reproductive health, gun violence, the economy. And one of the key issues is racism, which is what we're here to talk about today. To learn more about these key issues, you'll see a link to the report in the chat. Now, before we introduce our speakers, let's do one more poll to gauge where you are all at with your comfort level discussing racism. Okay, nobody said they would not talk about racism. A lot of people are comfortable about it and some people aren't. So what I know is that you are all in the right place because we're going to dive into this and how you can take action on this essential topic. With that, let's introduce our speakers. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our panelists. Madeline Milka is President and CEO of the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies, and Victoria Pelletier is National Partnerships Manager at Represent Women and Portland, Maine City Councilor. And we weren't able to have Lucy Rain Simpson join us today, unfortunately, as she's not feeling well, but she's Executive Director of the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center. And we still encourage everybody to check out the work that she's doing in the chat. So Madeline and Victoria, please tell us about yourself and your connection to today's topic, starting with Madeline.
Thank you so much, Gabe, for the introduction. And thank you for this opportunity to speak with all of you today. I am Madeline Milka. I'm the President and CEO of APACS, the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies. We are the educational arm to the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, CAPAC, which is composed of all of the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander members of the United States House of Representatives and the United States Senate. So my counterparts also include the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation and the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute. So my work is really based around making sure that there is more AA and NHPI representation throughout the political process, from community leader to elected office. So thank you so much for taking the time to have me on this panel.
Thank you, Madeline.
Yeah, hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. My name is Victoria Pelletier. I'm the National Partnerships Manager with Represent Women. So we are a nonpartisan nonprofit organization that is dedicated to building women's political power through system strategies that help more women run, win, serve, and lead. And so a huge thank you to our partner, She Should Run, for all the really incredible work that you do. We're so excited to be co-hosting this event. And thank you so much for including me here. And in addition to my work at Represent Women, I'm also an elected official. So I'm a city councilor for Portland, Maine. I'm the second Black woman that our city has ever elected, the first Black woman to serve in my district. And I'm currently tied with one of my colleagues for the youngest member. We're one of the only millennials, so we always fight over who's the youngest. And I'm also probably one of of the first activists that we have ever elected. So I was a community organizer. I had no prior political experience. I had no idea what I was doing. So for those of you here, I saw the poll, who have never thought about running for office. I see you because I was you. And so I'm really excited to be able to be here and share more of my story with you.
Okay. Wonderful. Wow, I am so excited to get into this conversation with you both. I'm already feeling inspired by the work that you're doing and leading out. I want to go back for a moment to some of the poll responses. They reflect my work in advancing racial justice through public policy advocacy. Too often, intersectional experiences of women and girls of color are overlooked, ignored, or intentionally disregarded as policy decisions are made. And I often hear things like racism doesn't exist, or we need to take incremental steps before we help everybody, or I don't see color, or we need to focus on more pressing issues. But to approach these issues that perpetuate systemic and structural racism, we need to use an intersectional approach because they end up leading to laws and policies that do not allow women and girls of color to thrive or access safety and economic security. And these approaches also fail to ignore the intersectionality of issues such as housing, childcare, domestic and sexual violence, reproductive health, and racism. And I'll share just a little bit about my work. At YWCA, we've long centered the experiences of women and girls of color. And here's an example from my home state of Utah that came from our previous legislative session. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Nationally, 1 in 4 women will experience domestic abuse, and in Utah, that's 1 in 3. Utah ranks in the top 10 states with the highest number of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Earlier this year, the Utah legislature quickly passed a law to require all law enforcement to conduct a lethality assessment or responding to intimate partner violence calls. But the assessment tool that Utah adopted in statute and invested $1 million in is only validated for cis white women in straight relationships, meaning the research shows that this tool is only known to address the potential lethality of white female survivors of domestic violence. This bill was a successful step towards improving safety for some survivors, while it simultaneously disregarded the safety of Indigenous women and girls and other women and girls of color. We are now working on amending the statute in the coming session to include a tool that's inclusive of all survivors. Now, why did this happen? Well, Utah ranks 49th for female political representation. Our legislature is made up of only 25% women, only 6 people of color. We have 1 Black woman, 1 Asian woman, 3 Latinas, and 1 Latino in our legislature. And this example shows a need to elect more women who understand this intersectionality of issues to office to ensure that public policy is inclusive and nuanced. So my intention today is when you hear from our incredible panelists, you will be inspired to take action, whether it's learning more about racism or deciding to run for office. So let's kick off my first question, which is for Madeline. Madeline, according to the Center for Women in Politics, only 100 out of 7,300 state legislative seats are held by Asian American women. There are so many contributing factors to this disparity, but one I'd like you to highlight for us is the fundraising angle. Given your extensive campaign fundraising experience, can you give us some insight into the obstacles AAPI women face in fundraising and how to overcome them?
Thanks so much for that question. Normally when I do the fundraising session for the trainings that Apex conducts for people interested in running for office, I start it with the question of, how do you feel about money? Because for ANHPI cultures, money is a very sensitive subject. And so when you think about your own relationship with money growing up with your families, it's not a topic that is publicly spoken about, whether or not you have the resources to support your family, asking for money from others outside of your core circle of close family members. That is just not done. And so that sort of cultural awareness is something that is sort of imbibed in all of us because of how our parents might have instilled that cultural tradition. And so when you take that aspect and then translate that into what we consider an efficient way to raise money, a direct ask, something that is meant to be a one-on-one conversation, that's a lot of uncomfort that must be felt to sort of overcome. And so I think in that sense, that's the first thing I really talk about, is to understand people's relationship with money, because then it's acknowledging the cultural awareness of that environment, and then saying for us to be successful, we have to either overcome that or at least acknowledge it and understand how do we look at this as an obstacle that we can overcome. And so that in itself is usually the hardest part of it. In general, everyone has a hard time in raising money. It's hard to ask people it's hard to ask people for money. And I think a lot of times that's also connected to self-worth and value. And sometimes people often don't think that they are qualified or prepared to be in this office. And so enter in imposter syndrome, and then you have a culmination of a lot of other aspects that mentally are the hurdles. And so the exercise and muscle of asking for money is something that requires time and commitment. It also requires a mental fortitude that says that you have all the qualifications necessary, you are worthy of this position, and that you have that you are a viable candidate. So I think a lot of these instances are based around emotions that we have to disassociate from the actual act of asking for money as an exercise of, regular democracy, because it's a legal way to participate. And for people who want to support your campaign, they can do that in a legal way by contributing. And so I think that when I approach it with the participants in our trainings, we just sort of attack it from an emotional point and then try to disassociate it with it later.
Wow, incredible points, and such a great example of showing just all of the layers there are. Thank you so much, Madeline. Victoria, you were elected to City Council in Portland, Maine in 2021 by becoming the second Black woman elected to that office. What systemic or racial issues affect Portland specifically, and possibly even encouraged you to run for office?
Yeah, thank you. Portland is a great city. I love living here, but it is still inside one of the whitest states in our nation, which is Maine. And Maine is a very white state by design. So there have been a lot of specific and targeted acts of racial segregation that had to occur to ensure that we maintain a certain level of whiteness. And that whiteness is often still used to attract tourists. That's why our tagline in Maine is vacation land. That's why we lean so heavily on the outdoors. And a lot of people think that these are just coincidences, but these are actually dedicated efforts to ensure that it remains white here. So in Portland, we still see very much of that. And on paper, we are a very liberal, progressive, hipster, foodie city, but we still have our issues just like any other city. So, we have a huge housing affordability crisis that disproportionately impacts Black and brown people living in the city. Our city is still segregated from redlining, and that impacts where we see housing density. And a lot of our zoning caters to single family homes due to exclusionary zoning laws, which again have a disproportionate impact on Black people who are living in Portland like me. And we are also seeing a significant rise in neo-Nazi extremism, white violence, and violent hate groups that target marginalized groups for their identity, myself included. We've had a couple of Nazi marches that have existed or that started most recently this year in Portland. So we still have a lot of significant issues. We like to say we're a smaller city, but we have large city problems as well. And because we are so active politically and diversifying, we still see a lot of these issues today. So I think with all of this happening, my lane was being an activist, my lane was being a community leader. That was where I was, and I was happy with that. I had no interest in being in politics. I thought it sounded terrible. But in my advocacy, I really realized that the issues that we are seeing in the city are the issues that I was living, and these are my experiences. And so I think in getting me to run for office, because I was doing a lot of community advocacy, I was asking myself, like, if somebody came up to me and was like, hey, here's what's going on in the city, do you think I should run for office? I have no experience. I've never done it before, but do you think I should? I would say immediately, enthusiastically, yes, because I want my policymakers to be diverse individuals who are living these experiences in real time, who are renters, who are lower income, who are people that are really the backbone of this city, but are very often not seen. So I realized I really had to take my own advice in that. And really realize that even though like I don't have a poli-sci degree, I've never done this before, I have no experience in politics, but I'm living these issues very regularly, from housing affordability to climate change that's going to disproportionately impact people that look like me, to not having a lot of rights for renters in the city. We have a huge demographic of renters, and we have luckily rent control that's consistently under attack, to racial related violence, to making sure that young people actually want to stay in Portland and put down roots and you know, start families. And so there's a lot of stuff happening. And I think that all of that ties into this framework of racism and oppression. And that, as a Black woman living in this country, is and will always be my lane, regardless of like the amount of education that I have around politics. So I really had to make sure, again, that I took that, you know, I took that upon myself to really get involved. And so I decided to run a campaign, and here I am. So.
Wow, that is great. And I love that you saw value and worth in your own lived experience, because that's powerful. And we are living the outcomes of all of the racist laws and policies that have been put into place for so many years. Thank you for sharing. Okay, this question goes to both of you, and we'll start with Madeline. A foundational element to racial justice work is coalition building. How do you identify important players in your community and get them to work with you when there is pushback within the community?
So I'm very fortunate, as I mentioned, to work with other communities of color inherently with my work. And so I think it's important for my organization to make sure that we are also showing up as a good ally and being able to show that we are supportive of our collective community. I think, you know, an example of that is, you know, during the confirmation of now Associate Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, APACS, along with Higher Heights, we wrote a piece in support of her nomination and confirmation. I think it's important for us to show up when we have strife, but also in celebration of our different communities. I'm happy to always promote the work of, you know, my colleagues over at Latinas Represent and Advanced Native Political Leadership. You know, we spend time at the Women's Collective, really supporting each other in highlighting these first, sometimes, you know, in the sense of these are the first individuals in their communities winning an elected office, and showing how do they build coalitions, because it's important to show that this is happening across all of our communities. And when we do that, we, you know, become more of an example of, you know, how other communities have worked together. So, you know, coalition building is, again, a muscle, and also one that is required of us to be sure that we're showing up. We are, you know, leaders within our own community to be able to suggest and highly, you know, support you know, our community, and at the same time be there for others when it's time for them in need of our support as well.
Thank you. Victoria, would you like me to repeat the question?
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay. A foundational element to racial justice work is coalition building. How do you identify important players in your community and get them to work with you, particularly when there's pushback within the community?
Thank you. I love talking about coalitions. This is my space, community organizing, community building, grassroots organizing. There's nothing like it. So it's really important to start where people are. I know we say that a lot, but that is the most important piece, I think, in coalition building, is figuring out where they are comfortable, where people are comfortable, and then also recognizing that we all have significantly different lenses based on our race, based on our identity, gender, ethnicity, culture, ability, experience, all of it. So coalition building is such a beautiful thing, but I think we're in such an instant gratification world, thanks to social media, where I think the beauty of building relationships can often get really lost. And don't get me wrong, I love social media. It is great for immediate connection, but building coalitions takes significant amount of time and significant amount of dedication, especially when it comes to building coalitions around racial justice. Because I think the first thing is there's no end date for racial justice work. Like, this is going to continue forever. There's no like, we did it, we crossed the finish line. That's never going to happen in our lifetime. We are in stolen, colonized land. This country was built and founded on racism, and it's going to take a consistent, dedicated effort in order to reverse a lot of the frameworks of systemic institutional racism that's just embedded in every single system that we have. So I think it's really important to be patient with your coalition work and really understand that it's going to take time to build a unit and to build a community that feels like it's working cohesively together. And pushback, I think, is actually really normal. I think that opens up an avenue for really healthy debate. You can't assume everybody is going to love the idea out of the gate. You can't be afraid to go back to the drawing board too. I think I see that so often. People are afraid to rework it. You can always just go back to the drawing board and say, okay, this isn't working. How do we figure out how we can do something where we can incorporate the feedback that we got and try a new solution and try to move it forward? So, I think with coalitions and with community building, there is dedicated trust that needs to happen. There is consistent, dedicated outreach that needs to happen. And you also can't be afraid to go back to the drawing board and rework it. And then the last piece that I'll say, because I feel like I could talk about this for 100 years, I love coalition building, is I'm always trying to identify the players that aren't already getting a platform, because I think that so often we have a privileged amount of groups that consistently get asked for their feedback, that consistently get asked to be part of these coalition building. But where are the individuals that we're not talking to who have really incredible ideas and just often don't have the funding or the resources to really boost them up? And those are the individuals that I want to build my coalition with, because I think in doing that, we can continue to just build this pipeline of really incredible work that is based truly in grassroots community of those who are most impacted, who are doing that work on the ground.
Okay, thank you both. Madeline, this next question is for you. As we discussed with coalition building, none of us get to the mountaintop alone. You currently serve as a mentor with Newcomb College Institute Women to Women Mentoring Program, as well as Georgetown University's Politics Mentorship Program. What advice would you give to women who are seeking mentorship along their leadership journey?
So I'm so excited about this question, just because I think the definition of leadership is any of us, and that means being able to seek out women of other communities to be a mentor. When I first started in this business, I had 3 white women who were my mentors, and then transitioned over into a place where I became more associated with the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander community. So for me, I think it's so important to see women of all communities be mentors to other communities, because then that definition of leadership expands. And to be able to say that someone has learned from someone who does not exactly have the same ethnic background or experience is just more an educational awareness of how people have experienced life. And so I think that's a part of understanding who you are as an individual and how you fit in amongst all other communities, and then becoming more of an ally and being one to say, how do I stand up with you in solidarity? And being able to say that, there are people who don't look like me, who I work with as a mentor, or someone who has learned from them as a mentor. I think that's important too, because that's a part of understanding how generations have experienced things differently, how different communities have experienced maybe similar challenges, but yet have different life experiences. And so that is a part of coalition building, is understanding that you're not just supporting your own community, but also learning from other communities as well.
Thank you so much for sharing. And will you talk a little bit about Apex Women's Collective?
Absolutely. So, it is a program that I started when I first came to Apex. I noticed the disparity between women who were in state legislative seats. That number was even less than 100 when I came in 2018. And so at the time, we had 3 senators. We had then Senator Kamala Harris, Senator Tammy Duckworth, and Senator Mazie Hirono. And that is a very unusual circumstance to have 3 Asian American women in the U.S. Senate, considering the size of this community and being able to see them get to the higher echelons of political influence. And so being able to encourage more of the ANHPI community to enter public service, and especially women, was important to me because we wanted to see this increase in our elected leaders, and that being able to understand that if we are going to get to 50 plus in terms of representation of this country, we need to have efforts from all of our communities and supporting that. And so creating this project within APACS is really to highlight our women leaders and also encourage more women of all ages to really participate and to see themselves through the women who have been able to enter public service, whether they're commissioners or someone who's been appointed to a board or someone who is running for office. And so it's important for us to highlight that in different generations, highlight that in a way that creates dialogue with other women of color. And so every year we host a women's summit, and then we also do a quarterly newsletter and a quarterly office hour. So there people can talk a lot about their experiences, and especially those people who have run for office and have won, to really explain to folks, what did it feel like to run as a first-time candidate, and also be an immigrant, with someone with a non-Western name, someone who speaks with an accent. How does that make you feel, and how did that work for you in terms of running in districts that may not have a high constituency of your ethnic group? So it gives women a chance to better understand those types of circumstances and how these women have been successful at it, and then also see if that's something that they want to continue to pursue. So at the end of these programs, we really want to see people feel that they've been inspired or empowered to do more public service or to consider running for office themselves.
Wow, that is absolutely incredible. Thank you. Victoria, before your run for city council, you were politically involved, but you didn't see yourself running for office. And once you did run, you experienced racist interactions with voters, microaggressions, and negative messages that called you inexperienced. Some of the women in our audience are likely in a very similar position. Either they don't see themselves running for office, or they're concerned about being subject to these attacks. What got you through it on your campaign, and what advice do you wish you had when you were running?
Thank you. That's a great question. Yeah, the inexperience, they loved that. They loved saying I was inexperienced. So for some context, I ran against somebody who was like 30 years older than me, a former counselor, a former state rep, very much part of the political establishment. And so, that was always kind of the talking point in terms of being not having experience. And I don't know, I think my response to that too is everyone would say, well, I think he has experience. He's more experienced because he's been on the council and he's been a state rep. And my response was always like, okay, and like, he's a white man in his 70s. So that's not like groundbreaking that he would have been able to have that experience and opportunity to actually be a state rep and to be a counselor. Our system is designed for that. So I don't actually take that as like an experienced politician based on those demographics. But I would always counter people saying I didn't have experience with saying the words opportunity and access. And so basically what I would normally say is that I can't get experience without opportunity. I can't get opportunity without access. And I need both of these things from voters in order to get the experience that voters thought that I should have before I serve. I'm a Black woman, I'm a renter, I'm a younger person. The system is not designed, especially in government, for me to waltz into City Hall and just win my seat. It's going to take consistent work of breaking down a lot of the racial and gender oppression that really exists in our local government and national government systems. And so it was really important, I think, for me to have that conversation at the doors with voters. And then I think in terms of feeling like I was qualified to run for office, I also realized that these issues that we're facing in Portland are issues that I'm living in real time. So everyone would say like, oh, well, you don't have, what experience do you have on housing? I can barely afford my rent every single month. I'm consistently trying to figure out how I can afford to live in a city that has been increasingly inexpensive for the working class. I'm also a Black woman looking at our rising sea levels and realizing that climate change is going to be something that my generation and the generations after me are going to have to significantly deal with. That's my issue that I'm looking at. Racial related violence, that is my issue that we're talking about. So I realized that my lived experience is experience. And I think that was probably the biggest lesson that I had to remind myself. I don't have a poli-sci degree, I've never done this before, but that was experience that is so rich that only certain demographics of marginalized individuals living in this country can really get. Is we have that lived experience of just being women of color. We know what it's like to be told no, or wait your turn, or not yet. And so I think that it's really important for me to keep that in mind. And then getting through my campaign and advice that I wish I had when I decided to run, so many things, but I think the thing that people liked about me is that I was not what you would look at as a politician. And so many people said that was a negative thing about me. Like, I'm not polished and I didn't take my campaign photos on like the cobblestone steps with a suit on. Like, I didn't do any of the things you're supposed to do as a candidate, but I was very real about the experiences that we were all facing and the work that I really wanted to do to make Portland a space for everybody. So I think the advice that I would give is, obviously, make sure that you're taking care of your mental health. Therapy is great. Friendship is great. Take a break if you need to, but also just remember who you are. Remember you are very, very qualified. Your regular experience, your regular life experience is qualification enough for you to serve. The only thing that you need is to care about the city or the state that you're living in. That's really the only thing I think that you need in order to be a successful politician, is to care. As long as you care and you really want to make this space a better place, you are very much qualified to be in that room. And I think I just want to make sure everybody listening, especially people who thought they would never run for office, you are very qualified. If I am in this seat, you can absolutely be in this seat. So never forget, despite the things that people are saying, that you deserve to be in that room, regardless of your quote unquote experience that you have.
Thank you. I have one more question for both of you, and then we'll go to audience questions. So we've talked at length about the ways that racism is an all-encompassing issue and the challenges that it poses. And sometimes it seems like the fight at large will never end. And you addressed that, Victoria. This is not going to stop. So how do you find and celebrate victories in your work? And we'll start with you, Madeline.
I think, the small joys it isn't really a measurement, really. It is a joy regardless of size. And I think that is really something that, I feel in the sense of when I look at the calendar and I see that we celebrate a Heritage Month for my community in May. And yet I celebrate that day, that month, every day. And I think that's what's important to recognize, is just like my counterparts, in the other communities, that we talk about Hispanic Heritage Month in September, we talk about Black History Month in February, but that doesn't mean when people talk to us about our communities that we aren't representing this work every day and celebrating it every day. And so when there are times of struggle and strife, I think those are the moments when we shouldn't feel guilt for also celebrating those moments of joy. And that shouldn't be taken away from any of our communities when we want to celebrate that, even at the same time holding space for things that are happening to each of our communities. And so, I celebrate, Hispanic Heritage Month, highlighting that on the Apex, social media accounts. We uplift, the work that our counterparts do in their Heritage Months. I think it's so important for us to be able to see that, joy is in all types of, examples, and finding that no matter what it might be, that we claim as a joyful moment is something that we should not be fearful of, and use that as a moment to really expand upon it.
I love that. Thank you, Madeline. Would you like me to repeat the question, Victoria?
Please, thank you.
Okay, we've talked at length here about the ways racism is an all-encompassing issue and the challenges that it poses, and it seems like the fight will never end. How do you find and celebrate victories in your work?
That's a great question. Something I'm still trying to be better at doing. I think it's, this work, especially in advocacy and dismantling systems, like you had said, like I had said, will never end. So I think even recognizing how important it is to stop and celebrate victories in itself, I think is a victory, because for so often it's also like just this go, go, go. And I was very bad at that in the beginning of like, if I accomplished something really incredible, I would be like, okay, but on to the next thing. And I got to do this thing and I have to do that thing. So I think stopping and pausing and even reflecting on, I'm going now into my 3rd year on the council. And that's really incredible. Because when I got elected, it was really challenging, and it still is very challenging. But I think the things that I've learned about myself, not being so reactive, like now when people yell at me, I'm like, okay, let's like work this out. This is okay. We're going to be fine. I'm not like so stressed out like I used to be. And I see a lot of changes in myself that are invaluable to like the life that I want to live in terms of just handling conflict, handling disagreements. Being on the council is like being on a group project every single day. So it's also working with people, figuring out ways you can work with people that maybe don't share the same views on the city as you do. And I think rest in itself is a really, I know that this has been quoted, I'm not sure specifically by who, but rest in itself is a really radical act. So just saying no is a radical act, saying I don't have the capacity for this, or I'm going to rest today. I'm going to focus on my mental health today. That in itself too is celebrating wins and choosing joy. If I'm deciding I'm going to read my book, I'm going to close my laptop, I'm going to answer that email tomorrow, and I'm going to read for a little while, like that feels really significant to me, and getting to celebrate that. And I think also just celebrating the fact that I'm able to do those things because of the Black women that came before me. So I'm able to embrace rest because of the privileges I was awarded for Black women who didn't stop, who couldn't rest, and who weren't awarded those types of privileges. So I always keep that in the back of my mind as well, as I pave a path for other Black women to follow in office, in and outside of office, that I really want us to maintain that level of rest, maintain joy. And I'm really grateful that I'm able to start recognizing how important it is for me to do that.
All right, thank you both. You both mentioned joy as being so critical to having in your life. And I think you've both done a really great job in laying out a very possible path towards elected office. And you've also inspired questions from the audience. So we are going to go to those questions. Thank you so much, participants, for submitting these. So the first question is to Victoria. This is from Joyce. Victoria, can you share your experience when running for office? Which mental well-being tools did you actively lean on to help you surmount the racist-related challenges during the campaign period?
Thanks, Joyce. Yeah, the campaign was rough. I mean, I ran a campaign. I'm so grateful for my community, for my friends that really helped me, because again, total newcomer, we were like learning on the fly what it is that we needed to do. And I had like door canvassing, for example. A lot of people loved that. I absolutely hated that. That was one of the worst experiences of the campaign for me, because there's a power dynamic when you're at somebody's door already. And when you're a younger Black woman at someone's door, there's like this weird dominance that happens. And there have been like doors slammed in my face. I've had my palm card crumpled up and thrown back at me as I was like retreating from someone's steps because I was afraid. There have been really racist incidents that happened to me while campaigning that were really hard on, people telling me I would never be in this position, people telling me I absolutely was not going to win. And there's no way I would be able to beat this person, which I love because I got 63% of the vote, which is like unheard of. So it was like a total sweep. And it was actually like, it feels great to think about those people that were like, she'll never win. And I'm like, here I am. But I think my mental well-being, that's something also that I'm really trying to make sure that I highlight and focus on. So it was definitely, again, knowing when to take breaks, knowing when I don't need to maybe canvass for 4 hours that day, I can maybe do it in 1 or 2. asking my friends to canvass with me or on my behalf, which helped as well. It just helped me with safety. It helped me feel like I was a little bit more protected and not out canvassing by myself, which again, political newcomer, I thought that's what you did. That's not really something that you do. So I had to learn that the hard way. And then I really leaned on humor and joy. I mean, it's, you know, I think of everything in politics as theater. I always call it theater. It's like just political theater every single day. Like, what am I going to run into? And I really tried to center that as well in my experiences of just saying, you know, I'm doing this to help my community. I have my friends by my side. My friends are making me food and trying to lift my spirits up when I'm having a bad day. That was really amazing. And I'm so grateful for that type of community to have. And then I planned a really, really big, wonderful election party. And I was looking forward to that. I said, win or lose, this party is going to be so good. And it was incredible. And it was fun because I got to celebrate my efforts. And I just said, I'm going to work as hard as I can. And at that party, I'm going to have a great time with my loved ones around me. And that was what I was able to do. And the cherry on top was that I won. But regardless, I was really proud of how I conducted myself. I was proud of the integrity that I held through the campaign. And I really remembered who I was. I remember the person that I was, the nasty ads, the write-ups, the comments. Don't read any of that. Don't read the comments. Don't read about yourself. It's a bad idea. And just remember who you are and keep that centered. Keep your integrity centered, keep your morals centered, and nobody can take that away from you, regardless of what people say. As long as you know who you are and you surround yourself with people that also know who you are, your mental well-being hopefully will be intact. And therapy. I cannot stress that enough. Being in therapy, huge help as well. So yeah, thank you, Joyce, for that question.
Okay, thank you, Victoria, for those tips. The next question is to both of you, and we'll start with Madeline. Madeline, how can a potential candidate start preparing to overcome the issue of racism and fundraising? And this is from Wanda Lis, and I hope I pronounced your name correctly. My apologies if I didn't. So how can a potential candidate start preparing to overcome the issue of racism and fundraising?
Oh, really big question. I think in this, it's more just preparation of knowing that the potential of it happening is there, and steeling yourself against, you know, should it happen. I think it's also important when it does happen that there are allies and advocates around you to be able to support you in that publicly, denouncing it, you know, being sure that you have advocates and allies from other communities supporting you in that. I think the situations that I have seen where it's happened, communities of who are from that community who might have, you know, if it's a different community or within the community, being able to have community leaders also raise their voices to say that this should not be happening publicly. So it is always a case-by-case basis. It's also important to know that should it happen, that you have people around you to support you in that. It's an unfortunate way to have it be a part of the process. And I wish that obviously that it didn't occur. And when it does, knowing that there are people around you who will uplift you and also denounce it.
Okay, Victoria, same question to you from Wanda Lis. How can a potential candidate start preparing to overcome the issue of racism and fundraising?
That's a great question. Also, hi, Wanda Lis. I'm pretty sure we have a meeting, I think, that's coming up soon. I was like, wait, this name looks very familiar. So good to hear from you. I'm glad that you're here. That's a great question. I think with fundraising specifically for me, I did really small fundraising efforts. Racism is going to exist, period. So there were certainly people that were like, I'm not giving her any money. And I was like, that's great. To be honest, if somebody doesn't like me or doesn't like my campaign or is racist, I don't want their money anyway. So it's fine. But I think what I focused on was the fact that I, as somebody that doesn't have a lot of additional funds often, I was like, how do I make sure that I'm targeting people that want to support my campaign but have limited funding? So I did $5 Fridays, which really helped a lot. So it was just like this little fun thing where it was like on Friday, you donate $5 and ask a friend to donate $5, or maybe like you donate $3 and a friend donates $2, and we can just have it always add up to $5. And I just shared that around in my community, and that was actually more successful than I thought, because I was getting tons of $5 donations. So my opponent was getting really, really large donations for their campaign, and I was getting little small donations, but they really added up. And I think that that helped significantly in terms of feeling like people were donating to my campaign. I didn't know, I'm sure again that I faced significant racism from people just saying like, I don't want to give her money. But I didn't ask anybody directly at the doors. I did all of that via email and via social media to avoid that. I didn't want to have that conversation of like, hey, can I have $5? And they're like, no. So I'm like, okay. I think I just kind of stuck to social media with that as well. You know, I think asking for money to support my campaign as a Black woman, I had to reason with that myself on how I felt, and how I could make sure that if the funds weren't coming in, that I still could run my campaign. And so that was a lot of, again, volunteer hours that I think really helped in terms of making sure that even if the funding wasn't coming in, that I had volunteers that wanted to donate their time to help, that wanted to hand make things so that we didn't have to buy a ton of stuff. And then I still had enough money left over for like a last minute boost at the end in terms of mailers. But I think that that's something, if you're even asking that question, we all know, especially as women of color, Black women, that's going to exist. I think it's just preparing for that ahead of time and saying, how can I make sure I'm reaching people that don't have a lot of funding? And how am I most comfortable with asking for money, knowing that the response may be traumatic for me? So I think I picked the avenue that worked best for me, which was social media. And so I think you have to figure out what works best for you and what makes you the most comfortable in terms of financial support.
All right, thank you. We are going to go to Jessica's question now, and this is a question for both of you. We'll start with Madeline. What are ways we can build trust and relationships to build a more diverse group in a place that has an overwhelming majority white demographic?
So, as I mentioned earlier, it's really about making sure that you're listening to other people and having them also learn from you, from your own stories. I mean, my own personal experience is I'm half white. My dad is German American. My last name is German. My mother is Vietnamese. I was born in Vietnam and came to the United States with my American parents to come live in the DC metro area. So half of my life is white because of my family on my father's side. And then my father and my mother is, having brought her family later into the United States from Vietnam. And so I think some of it is just listening, being prepared for people to see you as a leader, regardless of the fact that there is a majority of some other community. And that is a part of also recognizing too that other leaders, who don't look like us are also capable of doing those jobs as well. And being able to listen and being, aware that people look to you as someone who could be a leader themselves, and sharing your experiences, because it's a different lived experience, as in my case being an Asian American woman, where a lot of people who see me within my own community, because they know I'm half white, also understand that I have a lot more privilege. And so I think this is also knowing that we all have very different stories. We're not a monolith. And so this is a part of understanding and listening to each other, so that those experiences also translate to how can you be a problem solver and coalition builder at a time when people need true leadership and working across the aisle, being able to find solutions. And this is more about, understanding and listening to other people and having them also listen to you.
Thank you. That's very powerful. Just continuing to learn from other people, because we are not a monolith. Okay, same question to you, Victoria, which is, what are ways we can build trust and relationships to build a more diverse group in a place that has an overwhelming majority white demographic? And thanks again to Jessica for that question.
Thank you, Jessica. Yeah, this is my life right here in this question. So I think the first thing is that I've heard said before is make sure your table is set before you invite me in. So I used to work with businesses actually as a consultant with businesses that wanted to diversify their staff. And I always heard this question in terms of like, how do we get more people of color to be part of our organization? How do we community build with people of color? And these organizations would be missing the mark on how to make sure that they're being inclusive. So even like thinking about your hiring process, like what are you requiring? Is it a college degree? Is it a driver's license? Are these two things that are very necessary to the job? Is everything in English, or do you have multilingual options? Do you have flexible work hours? Do you have a value statement that advises on how you look at equity? How do you address racially motivated hate crimes that happen in the news every single day? What is your workflow for that? Do you feel comfortable publicly posting Black Lives Matter, Stop Asian Hate, all of these phrases that have been used to combat against the violent killings of people that look like me and look like my friends? So I think if you don't have an answer to those questions out of the gate, then how do you plan to set up your employees of color for success? And how do you plan to community build if these specific questions, which are just like things off the top of my head, if you haven't thought of these specifically on how you're going to address that? And then the second thing I actually said in a panel last month, but I said this and I didn't even realize it's like a little catchphrase now, but I was like, diversify your life. I think that that's really important too. So don't wait for Juneteenth and Black History Month to go shop at Black owned businesses. Just go shop at Black owned businesses and just incorporate that into your life. Start to volunteer your time with communities of color who are doing incredible work because you want to be part of their work. I think this narrative of like, I need to diversify, so I need to find some people of color to start hanging out with. Think about how you meet people in real life. You're not like, I need more friends, so I'm just gonna like pick that person and like see if maybe they wanna like continuously be my friend despite knowing nothing about them. You have to build relationships and you have to diversify your spaces. Start, again, going to fairs and festivals and community events with people that don't look like you just because you want to be there. And with that, you will be so surprised at how these relationships just start popping up if you really authentically just start engaging with communities of color. And then through that, the communities that you're looking for, the staff members that you're looking for, the friends that you're looking for are just gonna appear as community friends and allies and supporters because you took the time to actually go into their community because you wanted to, and then started to just have these conversations and get to know people outside of your comfortable circle. So that's always my advice, is just diversify your life, period. And then you'll start to see how these things will start to set up for you in terms of saying, wow, my circle looks a lot different than it did last year based on my intentional acts of actually getting to know people that just don't look like me.
All right, thank you for answering the audience questions. There are many insightful questions. Unfortunately, we do not have time for all of them as we're wrapping up the hour here. But before we wrap up with our panelists, we'd greatly appreciate if you could complete our survey after the webinar. Your input helps She Should Run continue to improve its programs and provide insightful and helpful resources for women. So now, one final thought from our panelists. What's one thing a woman in our audience can do today that would have a meaningful impact to combat racism in her community? And we'll start with you, Madeline.
Well, again, thank you for the opportunity to have me on today. I really would encourage people, especially with the work that my colleagues have been doing in regards to stopping Asian hate, is to really learn more about some of the invisibility of this racism. And so I would encourage you to take a look at the Brookings Institute in terms of their commentary on it, and really learn about other communities and their struggles to be able to be a good ally.
Thank you, Victoria. What is one thing a woman in our audience can do today that would have a meaningful impact to combat racism in her community?
Figure out what you're good at and then do that to help other people. So are you really good with numbers? Is there an organization that really needs somebody to balance their books? That's an organization led of color. Can you offer your time to do that? Are you good at graphic design? Is there a local organization hosting some kind of event? Can you offer your time to that? Are you really good at public speaking? Do you want to offer your time to work with organizations to help them get their messaging out? Figure out what you're good at and then use that to start being an activist in your community and start supporting organizations of color who need funding, who need work, and who need staff, but are continuously overlooked. So everybody has a skill, use that skill to start helping communities of color, and you will see how far that continues to go.
Okay, well, huge gratitude to you, Madeline and Victoria, for sharing your expertise and your wisdom with us today. And thank you to everyone for joining us. That wraps up our webinar for today. Have a wonderful day, everyone.